Welcome to the World According to Christy podcast. This show will motivate you, inspire you, and give you tools to activate your goals and dreams, whether those dreams are entrepreneurial, corporate, or personal.
This episode is sponsored by the Faith to Conquer Fear Inner Circle small group coaching and mentoring program. If you are ready to be a part of a safe and supportive environment that helps you increase your confidence, increase your faith, and conquer your fears so you can do all that God has called you to do, schedule a free Faith to Conquer Fear strategy session with me, Christy Demetrakis, at faithtoconquerfear.com.
Hello, and welcome to the World According to Christy podcast. I'm Christy Demetrakis, your host and author of Faith to Conquer Fear, Inspiration to Achieve Your Dreams, and Amazon bestseller, Faith to Conquer Fear, The Journey. As always, I am so excited to have you here for this episode. If you've been following me for any period of time, you know that I bring something a little bit different every week. Sometimes you will hear me pontificating about whatever it is that's on my mind for that week. Other weeks, you'll hear from some of my old friends, or what I call my vintage friends from my Faith to Conquer Fear and Sell Your Message radio shows that I used to have. And then other weeks, you will hear from some of my new friends. And that's exactly what we're doing this week. And so this week, I want to introduce you to Valerie Brantley, who is the CEO of Trifecta Management. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about her because she's going to tell you a lot more as we have our conversation today. Valerie works with established companies, entrepreneurs, and startups to create growing, profitable, and thriving businesses. As an experienced growth strategist, her mission is to help you cut through the noise, gain clarity, and create the conditions for growth. She leverages the knowledge gained in a 25-plus year career, managing $1 billion in revenue, actually more than $1 billion in revenue, at a Fortune top 50 company as a senior sales leader. She brings a wealth of knowledge in revenue generation and value creation. So she's got great experiences. Her extensive experience includes selling to the C-suite, managing various business models, channels, public and private companies, specialty business startups, and leadership development. Valerie has worked with businesses in every stage of development, from concept to launch to growth, scale, as well as maturity. So this is going to be a great conversation. Valerie, welcome to the World According to Christy podcast.
Thanks, Christy. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate it.
I am glad to have you here. And before we even get started, I'm going to tell people one thing. So if you have not been following my website, you will see, or if you've been on my website, you will see a podcast that Valerie and I actually did together. When did we do that? Back in January?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's been that long, but before life changed, we had a new normal.
Before everything changed. And it was a fantastic podcast. So if you missed it, you gotta hear it, because we talked about fear, which you all know is one of my favorite topics and clearly one of Valerie's, and you'll probably hear us talk a little bit about that today as well. So Valerie, again, glad to have you. I want to start by, just before we dig in, giving people an opportunity to get to know you a little bit. So tell us about yourself, your background, your family.
Sure. So I actually, as you said, it's like when you say how long it's been, it's like, woo, it's been a long, it's been a nice long time. But obviously it's been a long time as a senior sales leader in different capacities, different sales roles for quite a while. And then got to a point in my life where I loved it. I kind of had, it's one of those things where it's rare, but I was blessed in the sense that I had accomplished most of the goals that I had for myself in that capacity at a top 50 company. And I was at a point where I was like, what's next? What is it that I want to go after and accomplish? And that's when I said it's time for a new adventure. And more importantly than that, it was less me. It was more God saying it's time for a new adventure. God told me it was time. That's right. Sometimes he gives you those signals that your work is done in one place and he needs you to go do work in another place. And so God kept sending me signals and sending me that message that it was time for me to move to a different adventure, and it was time for me to fulfill a different purpose. And that's what led me to, I say, quote unquote, retire and then go start my own company. So fast forward, I know. So fast forward to today, And I work with companies, as you said, established companies, entrepreneurs, startups, people who have a similar dream, who have said, hey, I have a company, I want it to operate better, I want to grow faster, and I want to figure out how to make this company or this entity thrive. And that is what I've been doing for the last, call it 2.5 years, and I love it.
Wow, what a transformation. And yeah. You know what, you have done what so many people probably think about doing and are so terrified to pull the trigger. So what, I know God said it, but what gave you the confidence? Because they're two different things, right?
Yeah.
Because we have the ability to ignore God very well. Trust me, I know that skill very well. But what made you confident that it was truly time to move forward?
You know, you just said something. You just said something that was that rings true to me, which is a lot of people think about doing it, but there's the fear. They're scared to do it. I would tell you, I probably knew 3 years before I say quote unquote retired that it was time. But here's the blessing in it. I had the privilege and the pleasure to work for a really great company. And I think if you don't work for a good company, leaving is a lot easier.
I agree with that.
But I had the privilege and pleasure of working for a really good company that I still think the world of today. And that made it harder because I had a place that I really respected and work that I liked. But I think that the catalyst for me came when, God kept giving me those nudges, those little signals that it's time for you to move on and to do something different and to serve a different purpose. And I think the longer I resisted, the bigger the signals became.
I'm going to talk about some of those signals. So you can tell me now, or that's going to be my next question.
No, I laugh now, but it was a funny thing because I was like, okay. But, it starts as like that little signal or message in the back of your head. Then it goes to kind of like a little tap on your shoulder. And then it goes to a knock up against the head, right? And you kind of like, okay.
It's that thing that you keep hearing. This is the same thing I tell people about,
yes.
What is that vision that God has given you? And it's that thing that won't go away. No matter how long you try to ignore it, it just comes, you wake up thinking about it, you go to bed thinking about it, it just never leaves. And because there are lots of things, lots of ideas we get, right? And that's always my gauge is, let me see how long the idea sticks before I decide to move forward, because I get lots of ideas.
Right.
But it's that thing that then, as you said, it just kind of gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah.
It does. And it gets to the point where, for me, it got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore because clearly I was kind of like, well, maybe not. Maybe that's not what you want me to do. But clearly it got to a point where I knew I needed to serve a different purpose in a different place. And so I think the catalyst for change for me came when I stopped focusing on what I was going to lose and started focusing on what I could gain if I lived out God's purpose for me.
Ah, that's so good. That's so good. So let's talk about that for just a moment, because when you're in corporate America, it's easy to identify your goals. You know what your targets are. You know what success looks like.
Correct.
Because that's what you're evaluated on. If you do X, Y, and Z, success.
Yes.
So when you made that transition, how did you define success for yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll be honest to say, I imagine and I assume that people who have to make the same transition or who decide to probably go through the same thing, the first thing you have to do is decompress. And I'm serious when I say that, because if you've been at any company, any decent amount of time, you have a routine, your identity and what you do is tied to that company, regardless of what industry. So first you kind of have to decompress. And then the big thing, which I think is really, really challenging, you have to redefine and reinvent who you are. You have to go back to, here are the things that I was really, really good at in my corporate job, and that's value. There's value in that. But then you have to step forward and say, what about those skills can I take forward into this new life? And what do I want to be known for, and what's important for me? And that's where you start shifting into, okay, I got to stop focusing in on the challenge of shifting from something that's familiar, that's comfortable, that's safe. And you got to say, how do I take these transferable skills, this experience, and this new passion, and how do I now, which is a blessing, sometimes we don't see it as that, but how do I now turn this blessing from God to shape something from the very start, to shape something from the beginning, and turning it into something that hopefully blesses me, my family, and most importantly, blesses others? How can I use all of that to create something even better? And that's kind of where the process started.
I love it. I love it. So when you work with your clients, because you said you work with people at all stages, from concept to launch to all these things. So I'm sure they're coming, in many cases, they're coming in with the same place that you were, right? When you started, which makes it relevant. This is why you can coach them. So how do you help them shift that mindset that you just talked about?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it depends really on, to your point, where they're starting. If it's an existing company, where I have to start with them typically is, if they already have a company, it's been in operation for a while, they already have a set way of doing things, right? So they've got they have their product or service or portfolio, they've been running their company. They've, for the most part, they've achieved a certain level of success, but most of those existing companies are at a point where they either have plateaued, so, things have kind of started to slow down a little bit, or they're doing well and they're ready to kind of go to that next level. Like, how do they start expanding the business faster? And that skill set and mindset is different. Where the focus really is there is helping them understand what's working and what's not working. And then figuring out, how do they shift their paradigm of where they are and where they want to go. It's kind of like that. There's the quote, and I probably won't get it completely right, but the quote about what got you here won't get you there.
Get you there. That's a great quote. That's a great quote. Yes.
Exactly. And it's one of those things where, and I'm guilty of it, we're all guilty of it probably, the things that made us successful in one arena, we think we can take that exact same formula and move it to a different arena. But what we forget is the dynamics in the new arena may be different, the players may be different, and the environment. And so we have to learn to take what's working, but then shift and add new tools to the toolbox.
Yeah, and that's, and the challenge that people have is that they try to do that by themselves.
Yes.
It's hard to shift that mindset because a lot of times we have blind spots. To your point, we know exactly what we did well before because they told us, right?
Yes.
They told us, you're good at
crystal
this,
clear.
check. You're good at this, check. And now all of a sudden you have to run this business or run this ministry or whatever it is that God has caused you to step out there and do. And now you have to reassess my skill sets, my behaviors, everything that I do that was ingrained into me before may not be the same anymore. So how do people get to the point of redefining or defining success for themselves?
It's, I typically ask them to step back from, the quote unquote traditional business part for a moment. And this actually is the hardest part. It's easier to teach someone how to create demand or a business formula or how to sell something. It's harder to change behavior, right? Because we're all creatures of habit.
Yes, we are.
And so I first go back with them and ask them questions such as, like, how are you defining success for yourself and your company? And if you had to be known for something, what is it you want to be known for? And at the end of the day, if you're going to work at this company that you've created, what is it that's going to make you get up every morning and be excited about it? Like, what is the reason you started it? what makes you excited? And hopefully some of those things, the reasons why they started the company are still the same and still there. But in some cases, it's like anything else in life. Sometimes that passion or purpose gets lost when you're trying to run a business or a company day to day.
Yeah.
So that's where we start. First, like, how are you defining success, and what do you want to be known for, and what's important for you? And that's where we kind of start, you know, for lack of a better word, we kind of start designing what they want that company and that life to look like. And then once they can start to articulate it and create a vision, you know, you start creating that picture in your head about, well, I want to do this first thing in the morning, or start early. I want to get to the office and do A, B, or C. And then I want to stop at this time so I can have some balance and time with my family or my friends. Here are the things that are important to me that I want to make time for. And when you start getting them over that, that initial hesitance, they start to open up and tell you, like, okay, this is the vision that they want for their life. And then that's where we start working.
Mm-hmm. And getting that vision out, that's the hard part, right? Because some people have a hard time. They feel like they don't deserve it. Like, it's too big. There's no way I can say, I want this, or I see my life this way. Because there's also that little piece that says, really? You just left that nice, cushy corporate job. Are you seriously thinking you're going to make that salary? Yeah,
right.
So all that is very true. And something you said made me think about the word intentional, being intentional. Because I think once you get really clear on the vision, that helps you to become more intentional. But how can we become more intentional every day, whether we are making the transition that we've been talking about, or even just in our everyday lives? How can we become more intentional?
And this is one I keep working at also. It's I think it's one of those challenges that we all have to keep working on as our lives become busier and busier. But I first step back and say, or ask the question, what prevents us from living out our true purpose, from having a life of meaning? What prevents us from doing that every day? And where I typically start is to say, look at how everyone functions. It's distractions. So there are tons of distractions every day. And what happens when you're distracted? You can't focus. You don't have clarity, right? If it's not traffic or a Zoom call or a phone ringing or email or something, there's always a distraction. And that's probably the number one thing that takes us away from having clarity and focus. The other thing is just being overscheduled. So I also start there to say, if you want a life of meaning and a life, living a life where you serve your purpose, you have to realize that your time is your most important and scarce commodity. So if you don't make time in your day for the type of life that you want, it won't have purpose. And what happens is we then go through a day where the day happens to us instead of designing or structuring a day that is consistent with the vision that we want.
That's so good. And I did a video for our church on vision, writing a vision or rewriting a vision. And one of the things I said is not unique, but there's a huge difference between being busy and productive. And there's this clip from this movie Bagger Vance. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Bagger Vance with Will Smith. Fantastic movie. Okay, can I just say that's a great movie and everybody should watch it. I'm not getting royalties. I wish I was, but it's a fantastic movie. And there's a line, I hope I can remember it. There's a line in the movie where Juna is the golfer, Bagger Vance is the caddy, and Juna is just swinging this club, and he said, you know what, if you could see the field, what he says is, if you've seen the field, you wouldn't be hacking away at that ball like you chopping weeds under your front porch.
Right.
And so I thought about that, and I'm like, because when you hack away at something, you're just swinging. You're just swinging. You have no direction. You're just swinging. There's no purpose, no intent.
Right. And
it's the same thing with intentionality. It's the same thing with time management. It's the same way with letting the day rule you versus you actually owning the day. There's this huge difference between being busy and productive.
Absolutely.
Right? Huge difference. And if you are just busy, because a lot of people wear that busy like this badge of honor. Oh, I'm so busy. What are you doing, girl? I'm so busy. Well, how was your day? Girl, I was just so busy. Right.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, but did you get anything accomplished? Because if at the end of the day, you didn't accomplish anything that got you closer to the vision or closer to the purpose or closer to that goal, another wasted day. Another wasted day.
And think about, to your point, think about, and I've been there, so I'm guilty of it too. Think about how proud people are and how proud at times I was when I was like, oh, I'm so busy. And then you get home at the end of the day and you're like, I had 5 things on my list and maybe I knocked off 1. The other 4 I didn't even touch because I was busy, but I wasn't focused or intentional, right?
Yes. And I love the intentionality because I'm a to-do list person. If it is not and the people who used to report to me, I would tell them, and they knew, if it is not written down, it is not going to happen. It's not that my heart didn't want to do it, my head wanted to do it, but if it is not on paper, on a list, so I can mark it out, done, it is not going to happen. But I also find myself being one of those people who will write something down that I'm just about to do, just so I can say I've actually accomplished something. Like, wait a minute, I gotta write it down. Done, and that whole black Sharpie. But that's not being intentional either, technically, because I'm doing a lot of the busy work first because that's easier. So the other part of being intentional is focusing on the things that are really going to deliver results.
Couldn't have said it better. You said it perfectly, and that is where I think the misconception or maybe the default that we have as human beings is I'm not sure anyone really teaches us how to live a life of intentionality, right? Mm-hmm. Like you kind of hear, well, you want to live a good life, or you want to be successful, or you want to be happy, or whatever the adjective is. But rarely do we teach people how to live with intention. And so the drawback is what we tend to default to as human beings is we assume that chance or circumstance will tap on our shoulder or will make its way into our day, and that will swoop everything together, make it perfect, and then we will have purpose and meaning, and the day will go exactly as we imagined it would go. And that's not how life works, as we all know. And so what I would say is, if you look at, call it the top 2% of the most successful people, there are a couple of things they have in common, but one of the biggest things they have in common is understanding the importance of living with intention and designing your day instead of your day following you. And that is one of the biggest principles. And so if we think about, okay, if we don't want to leave our life up to chance, if we don't want to live every day just going from one emergency, or as I call it, time tornado, to the next, right?
I love that term, time tornado. I love it.
Yes, I used to say fire drills, but now I say time tornadoes because it's just always.
It's much sexier. I love it.
And so if you don't want to live your life from emergency or time tornado to another one, then you kind of have to step back and say, for all aspects of your life, how do I want to live my life differently? And one of the hardest things, but I think one of the most impactful things, is to look at your life in terms of your work, your family. For me, it's my role as a wife, as a parent, as a daughter. And if you step back and, compartmentalize in that way and say, okay, let's start with as a wife, how do I want to live my life, in terms of my spouse? What is it that's important to me from a marriage? Then what is important to me as a parent? What is it important to me in terms of friendship or being a daughter? And then you can go to work. And if you start doing those things, you start to get those little grains of clarity. And I'll give you an example that you probably will laugh, but I think we all can empathize. Years ago in college, I used to be consistent with exercise, right? Used to, I think we could probably all say that, but you probably didn't need to exercise as much then. Flash forward, and one of the personal goals, or one of the places where I knew I needed to have better intention a couple of years ago, was personal health and personal well-being. And it was the same thing. It was I'm going to go about my day and hopefully I can leave at a certain time and then I can get my exercise in. And what happens? The day doesn't go the way it's supposed to go. The time tornadoes happen. It's 7 o'clock before I even start walking in the door. I'm exhausted. There's no way I'm going to do it now. And if so, it's going to be a half effort, right?
Yes, yes.
And so that was one of the things that I stepped back and said, okay, how do I, in my personal life, how do I want to be intentional about bringing my whole self to my family, to our child, as a parent, to my job, my company. And I knew that health and well-being had to change. It had to shift. So I got intentional. And I said, okay, what is working and what isn't? Trying to do this at the end of the day after a 12+ hour day doesn't work. So guess what? I'm going to have to get intentional and get up early. Earlier.
Yes, earlier. I know.
Earlier, right. And at first, was it something that I wanted to do? Probably not. But then what I realized is if I did that and if I did it consistently, how would that set up the rest of my day for success? Would it enable me to be better as a wife, a mom, a company owner, a friend? And so that intentionality started me on a road to kind of do things differently. But that's kind of where it has to start. I kind of recommend that people compartmentalize it and just say, if someone had to write a summary about how good a friend you were, or what type of friend you were, or your kid had to write a paper or a paragraph about what type of parent you were, and kind of, and give the details, would you like what it said?
That's such a great, that's
thought-provoking. Yeah, it's a little scary. You're like, I don't know if I want to answer that.
I don't think I'm going to ask anybody.
And you know what? It's one of those things that, I'll be honest with you, when I went through the exercise myself, a while back, there were some things that I was proud of and I thought I did well. It just like most of us, some things that I could be proud of. And there were some other things I'm like, you know what? I'm not giving this area of my life the focus that I should. And so when you don't, what are the consequences? And the consequences, to your point earlier, are you start saying things like, wow, I wish I could have done that, or I regret not doing this. Or you start feeling like you're sleepwalking through your own life, or you're living a life that's passive and not active. You're living somebody else's life. And that's when it's time to step back and really think about living with more intentionality.
Yeah, I love that. And, as you get older, because we all get older, if we're fortunate, we get older, right?
Right.
But as you get older, I think, some of those big milestones are great opportunities, great inflection points, right? To really say, am I living the life I expected to be living at this time?
Right.
And if not, what can I do to shift? Right?
Correct.
And I'm not saying leave your husband, leave your kids. I'm not saying any of that. Some things you just have, okay? But I think we every now and then, and it doesn't have to be at those major milestones, but every now and then we do need to take a step back and do exactly what you said. Is think about, just start with your day.
Right.
What did I do today that was truly intentional? I intended to go to the gym at 6:15. I did. Check. I intended to get on this car. Whatever those things are, were you intentional about them and were able to achieve them? And because over time, you start to see results.
Yes. The
frustration comes, right, when you're doing all this stuff, the busy work, and there's no results. That's when you get frustrated. Because like, what? I'm busy, but I'm not accomplishing anything.
That's right.
Because you're not intentional. Different. There's a difference. I often tell people that, for many years, back to this busy versus productive, for many years, I was very busy. I was doing my P&G, or whatever company I was working for at the time, but it's been Procter & Gamble for the last 17 years. But I was, doing my P&G, then I'd come home in the evenings and I was working on my book, or I was doing my podcast, or I was whatever, right? Doing all these things. Busy, making not one dime of money. Not near a dime of money. But I was busy. I had a website. I had all these different things. And it wasn't until that long ago that I truly got intentional. But my intentionality came when I made the decision to get a coach.
There you go.
And so sometimes you need that external influence, but you have to be intentional and also understanding that you need help.
Yes.
Right? Clearly, what I have been doing, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over, thinking you're going to get different results.
Right.
Busy, getting no results. And so I got a coach, which I think, is a perfect segue to, again, all the things that you do, that you specifically do to help people at every stage, right?
Yes.
Because for me, even though I had been in business for a lot of years, it was as if I was a startup because I hadn't been doing all the right things.
Right.
To actually get it going. I'm in a very different place now, but again, very intentional. So tell me this, Valerie, because we're getting close to wrapping up here. What is it that you're working on right now for folks?
Well, there's a couple of things. So to stay on the whole intentionality and living your life with purpose, I have this topic, just as we've been able to just talk about it and really just have a good conversation. This topic is one I'm finding that most people are asking for new solutions and new ways to improve, so regardless of how successful they are, the demands on your time very rarely, are reduced. The demands on your time just get more and more complicated and complex, right? Mm-hmm. And so because of that, I'm creating a program called the Path to Productivity, which is for businesses and business owners that really want to step back and think about how do they leverage that whole concept of being more intentional, not only for themselves, but for their business, so that they can make sure they live a life that's intentional and that has meaning and purpose, but they have a company and a business that follows along that same path. So that's one. And then the second thing, which is more around the traditional business coaching and business growth, I have 3 new programs that I'm just getting ready to launch, which really are designed to help companies in 3 stages. The person or owner who's ready to launch their business, the person who's been in business a while and is ready to grow their business, and the third group or the third program is one for people who are really ready to take their business to the next level. And that can mean different things for different people. It could be, hey, I'm ready to take my company to an 8-figure company, or I'm ready to expand my staff, or I'm ready to hit a certain, income profit level. But whatever that next level is, that program is designed with my coaching to help them get there. So those are kind of the 4 things that are new.
Oh, wonderful. Great content, great things. And it sounds like something for any stage of your business, which is fantastic.
Correct.
How do people contact you, Valerie?
They can go to my company website, which is www.trifectamgmt.com.
Fantastic. And are you on Instagram, Facebook, any of those places as well?
I am. They can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn under the same company name, Trifecta MGMT.
Awesome. Valerie, I want to give you one more opportunity to say anything that I didn't get to ask you. What would you like to say to people before we wrap it up?
I'd say to close, I would just recommend stepping back for a moment, each of us, and taking a moment to really think about what it is we want and what we want out of life, what we want for our families and for ourselves, for our friends, our spouses, and then think about, are we living our life that is consistent with that today? And are we managing our time in a way that's consistent with that today? And if not, then step back and follow some of the things that you and I talked about, and they can start living a life of purpose and one that's meaningful and relevant to them.
Love it. Well, Valerie Brantley, CEO of Trifecta Management. Thank you so much for being my special guest on the World According to Christy podcast. And thanks to all of you for watching and or listening. On this episode, you get the opportunity to do both. And I want to thank you in advance for subscribing so that you get notifications of every episode coming each week. I am doing what I love. I will look forward to talking to you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the World According to Christy podcast. If you're ready to increase your confidence, increase your faith, and conquer your fears, visit faithtoconquerfear.com to schedule a free strategy session with Christy. Thank you for listening to the World According to Christy podcast. Remember to subscribe to ensure you receive updates on upcoming episodes. Check out free resources to help you increase your faith, increase your confidence, and conquer your fears at faithtoconquerfear.com.